Today I'm in Fallbrook, California at the gravesite of Sergeant William Pittenger, a Civil War veteran who was one of the first recipients of the Medal of Honor. He, as well as 5 others, received it on the first day it was awarded in 1863, due to their participation in what is now known as the Great Locomotive Chase, also known as Andrew's Raid. William Pittenger enlisted into the Union Army as a private in Company H of the 2nd Ohio Infantry at the outbreak of the Civil War in April of 1861, and he did so for 3 months of service, during which he participated in the First Battle of Bull Run. He eventually re-enlisted for a 3-year term, working his way up through the ranks of corporal and eventually sergeant in March of 1862. Technically, Pittenger was awarded the 5th ever Medal of Honor. This was done on March 25, 1863, and it was for his service during the Great Locomotive Chase. James Andrews was a Kentucky-born civilian who served as a secret agent and scout in Tennessee for Major General Don Carlos Buell. Andrews presented the general an idea. Andrews' plan was that a train engineer in Atlanta was willing to defect to the Union with his train, and if Andrews could supply a crew to assist running the train, they would tear up the track and burn bridges all the way to Chattanooga. The main target was a railway bridge at Bridgeport, Alabama, although William Pittenger believed that Andrews also intended to target several other bridges in Georgia and Tennessee. Now, taking Chattanooga meant that the Confederates would reinforce Chattanooga's garrison from Atlanta, and once sufficient forces had been deployed to Chattanooga to stabilize and hold the line, the Confederates would then launch a counterattack from there with the advantage of a local superiority of men. It was this process that the Andrews Raid sought to disrupt. If they could block the railroad reinforcement to the city of Chattanooga from Atlanta, then General Mitchell could take Chattanooga. The Union Army would then have rail reinforcement and supply lines leading to Union-held stronghold in Nashville, Tennessee. Andrews recruited civilian William Hunter Campbell, as well as 22 volunteer Union soldiers from 3 Ohio regiments. They traveled in small parties in civilian attire in order to avoid arousing suspicion, and all but 2 reached their designated rendezvous point at the appointed time. Their plan was to steal a train and run it north to Chattanooga, stopping to damage and destroy tracks, bridges, and telegraph wires, as well as track switches behind them, so as to prevent the Confederate Army from being able to move troops and supplies from Atlanta to Chattanooga. The raiders planned to cross the Federal siege lines and rejoin General Mitchell in Chattanooga. The raid began on April 12, 1862, when the train known as the General stopped in order to allow passengers to get breakfast in Atlanta. Andrews and his men climbed aboard, severed it from the passenger trains, and took the engine as well as 3 boxcars and started north. The train's conductor, William Allen Fuller, and 2 other men chased the stolen train on foot, then by handcar. Trains at the time only averaged about 15 miles an hour, with short bursts of speed to about 20 miles an hour. Also, the train north of Atlanta was very hilly, keeping speeds down. Even today, average speeds are rarely greater than 40 miles an hour between Chattanooga and Atlanta. Since Andrews intended to stop periodically to perform acts of sabotage, the Confederates could conceivably catch up to the train before it reached Chattanooga. Due to the fact that the raiders had stolen a train that had a regular schedule, they actually needed to keep on the train's timetable, otherwise they would run up behind a train or fall too far behind. If they reached an area ahead of schedule, they had to wait there until the scheduled southbound trains passed them before they could continue north. As they drove the train north, they managed to cut telegraph wire and break rail line. The pursuing Confederates eventually took hold of their own train and chased the raiders north. The pursuers were stopped by the broken track, though, forcing the party to continue the pursuit on foot. Beyond the damaged section, he took command of another train, the Texas, south of Calhoun, where Andrews had passed it, running backwards. The Texas train crew had been bluffed by Andrews at Calhoun into taking the station siding, thereby allowing the general to continue northbound along the single-track main line. The Confederate pursuers, taking the Texas, took command, picked up 11 Confederate troops at Calhoun, and continued the pursuit northbound. Destroying the railway behind the hijacked train was a slow process, and the raiders were too few in number and too poorly equipped with the proper railway track tools and demolition equipment, and the rain that day made it difficult to burn the bridges. With the Confederate pursuers in the Texas still chasing the General, the 2 trains steamed through Dalton and Tunnel Hill. The raiders continued to sever telegraph wires, but were unable to burn bridges or damage the Tunnel Hill. The wood that they had hoped to burn had soaked with rain, and just before the raiders were able to cut telegraph wire north of Dalton, the pursuers managed to send off a message from there alerting the authorities in Chattanooga of the approaching stolen train. At mile marker 116.3 north of Ringgold, Georgia, the train ran out of both water and fuel, and Andrew and his raiders had to disperse into the woods. They abandoned the train and scattered. Eventually, though, within 2 weeks, all had been captured, and ultimately General Mitchell's attack on Chattanooga failed. The Confederate forces charged all of the raiders with acts of unlawful belligerency. The civilians were charged as unlawful combatants and spies. All of the prisoners were tried in military courts, and Andrews, being found guilty in Chattanooga, was executed by hanging on June 7th in Atlanta. On June 18th, 7 others who had been transported to Knoxville were convicted of spies and returned to Atlanta and also hanged, their bodies buried unceremoniously in an unmarked grave, eventually being reburied in the Chattanooga National Cemetery. A Corporal William Pittenger said that the remaining raiders worried constantly about being executed. They attempted to escape, and 8 eventually succeeded. Traveling for hundreds of miles in pairs, they all made it back safely to Union lines, including 2 who were aided by slaves and Union sympathizers, and 2 who floated down the Chattahoochee River until they were rescued by the Union blockade vessel, the USS Somerset, in the Gulf of Mexico. The remaining 6 were held as prisoners of war and exchanged for Confederate prisoners on March 17, 1863. On March 20th, recently released raiders arrived in Washington, D.C., and the following day, Pittenger wrote a letter to the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, detailing their mission to Georgia. On March 24th, they were interviewed by Judge Advocate General Joseph Holt, who was able to corroborate the details of their mission with the testimony of raiders who had escaped the year prior. They were invited back to Stanton's office at the Department of War, and it was announced that the raiders would receive the newly approved Medal of Honor. The first of which to receive it was Jacob Parrott, who had been abused as a prisoner. The others, Sergeant Elihu Mason, Corporals William Pittenger and William Reddick, and Privates William Bensinger and Robert Buffum, also received it. They were additionally all offered commissions as first lieutenants. And after the 6 raiders received their Medal of Honor, they were all taken to meet President Abraham Lincoln at the White House, which became a tradition for all Medal of Honor recipients. Later, all but 3 of the soldiers who participated in the raid also received the Medal of Honor, with posthumous awards to families for those who had been executed. Due to the fact that Andrews and Campbell were civilians, they were not eligible for the Medal of Honor. Now, both the General and the Texas survived the war and have been preserved in museums. The General, located in Southern Museum of Civil War and Locomotive History in Kennesaw, Georgia, close to where the chase began. The Texas, the engine that pursued the General, is in the Atlanta History Center. Since William Pittenger and those 5 other men received the first Medals of Honor back in 1863, thousands have been awarded. But as time has gone on, the military has come up with other medals and awards to give for less gallant acts. And now the Medal of Honor is reserved only for the bravest of acts, often those that involve individuals giving their lives for others. The first ones awarded in the 19th century were mostly associated with saving the flag and country, not just for patriotic reasons, but because the U.S. flag was a primary means of battlefield communication at the time. Because no other military decoration was authorized during the Civil War, some seemingly less exceptional and notable actions were recognized by Medal of Honor during the conflict. During the early 20th century, the Department of the Navy awarded many Medals of Honor for peacetime bravery, one of which was John Henry Helm aboard the USS Chicago, being awarded one for saving the ship's cook from drowning. Between 1919 and 1942, the Department of Navy issued 2 separate versions, one related to combat and one for non-combat bravery. Criteria for the award also tightened during World War I, and on July 9th of 1918, the War Department version of the medal required that a recipient distinguish himself conspicuously by gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, and also required that the act of valor be performed in action involving actual conflict with the enemy. The first account of the chase was published a year after the event in 1863 by William Pittenger under the title Daring and Suffering, eventually being republished in 1881 as Capturing a Locomotive and in 1889 as The Great Locomotive Chase. The book was a major success and was widely praised. 2 decades later, a newspaper would claim that it was in half of the old soldiers' households in the country. The silent movie The General, released in 1926, was inspired by The Great Locomotive Chase, specifically by the memoirs by William Pittenger. The film starred Buster Keaton, a well-known silent film actor at the time. Keaton performed many of the dangerous physical stunts on and around a moving train, including jumping from the engine to a boxcar and running along the roofs of the rail cars. One of the most dangerous stunts involved Keaton pulling a railroad tie out from being lodged into the track, with the train steadily approaching, then sitting on the cowcatcher of the slow-moving train while carrying the tie and tossing it onto another tie to dislodge it from the tracks. The locomotive could have derailed and Keaton could have been injured or killed had he either failed to pull out the tie in the first time or mistimed the throw the second time. Thanks for watching, and as always, until next time, get lost.